So for this inflammation exercise, we're going to be working on ulnar and radial deviation. Being that our patient would be in a sling and has to limit that shoulder and elbow mobility, we're just going to be working mostly the wrist. So for radial deviation, we're going to have our patient hold a weight. This is a 3-pound weight. They're going to hold it to where the far end is going to be extended away from the thumb. Now Preston is going to ulnar deviate his hand so that the weight falls forward, and then he's going to have to concentrically activate the radial aspect of his the musculature to bring the weight up. Now, if we want him to do ulnar deviation, we're just going to put the weight on the other end of the hand, and he's going to ulnar deviate and having to lift that weight up towards the forearm. Our second exercise is going to be putty play. So again, because we can't use the elbow and shoulder, we're going to have our patient work more of the intrinsic hand muscles. So we're going to have Preston hold some putty in his hand. And he's going to work on improving that grip strength, or he can work each finger individually by either pressing his thumb straight down into the putty or the other digits. Proliferation exercises, we're going to have our patient in a stand position, kind of taking a similar stance to what he would be performing while throwing a baseball. We would use a body blade, but we don't have access to that, so we're going to be using band work to create the perturbation. Our patient's going to take it in their hand, and he's going to hold it at 90 degrees flexion to begin with, and I'm going to have him oscillate the band going up and down. I'll be pulling at different directions just to create contractions at different angles. And then we can also have our patient reposition to a 90 degrees of abduction, performing the same perturbations. And then as they progress through proliferation and the healing phases, they can come to a slightly more overhead or 90-90 internal-external rotation position. We want them to activate that core, and this just kind of mimics their position while they're going to be throwing a baseball once they get to that maturation phase. Next, we're going to have them go through internal-external rotation with the ball toss. So we want our athlete to be in a similar stance that he'd be throwing a ball. He's going to bring the elbow up to 90 degrees of abduction, and then keeping the bent elbow at 90 degrees of flexion. And then we're going to be having him internally and externally rotate while tossing the ball up and down. So he's going to toss the ball, catch it at the top, and then slowly come back down for that eccentric contraction. While he's going into external rotation, it creates a concentric contraction. So in the maturation phase, where we can get really more sport specific and functional with our exercises. This first exercise, again, we would have used a body blade, but being that we don't have one, we're going to be having our athlete hold onto a band while we're adding the perturbation. So he's going to take this band, and we're going to mimic it more to his actual throwing phases. So he's going to start back in that early cocking phase back here. So go ahead and bring that on back. Perfect. And he's going to start to create those oscillations while I'm adding resistance in different angles. Now you can slowly progress to a little bit more overhead in that middle phase of throwing as we're adding the resistance. And then finally he can come into that deceleration phase where his arm's going to be more forward, and we're trying to create more of an eccentric contraction by pulling him in the direction that he's going to be throwing. Good. So now we're going to be doing what we've deemed the Angel Special. We're going to be placing this band around Preston's shoulder, and I'm going to be pulling it across his body as he's in his throwing position. When Preston comes into that cocking phase, he's going to have to contract his rhomboids, pulling his shoulder back as if he's ready to throw a ball. And then as he rotates forward to actually release the ball, he's going to have to control that forward motion that I'm creating with the band. One more. For our sport-specific exercises, we're going to be working with a catcher specifically from baseball. So as they're going through the rehab in that early inflammation or that middle inflammation phase, they're going to be doing pendulums. So I'm going to have Preston place his hand on the chair right here to kind of support himself. And he's going to let that arm hang forward. No contraction whatsoever, but he's going to use the weight of his body to kind of help create some pendulum action. Now he can go forward and backwards. He circular motions if he needs to. And then this is just to help improve range of motion about that shoulder joint. So after that, we're going to progress towards our eccentric ball toss. We want them to move in somewhat of a D2 pattern, like we do in PNF. So Preston's essentially going to be holding this ball with his elbow extended and his shoulder at flexion. And I want him to come up, start at the top, and then he's going to come back down slowly on that D2 pattern, and then toss that ball up and catch it up at the top. And again, we really want to have him slow and controlled, coming down and across his waist to create that eccentric contraction, which is a big issue that a lot of throwers have when they injure those rotator cuff muscles in that deceleration phase. After this, we're going to be working a more sport-specific type of movement, being that we have a catcher. Likely they're going to be started in a squatted position, and we want to work to have them be able to make that throw to second base. Again, we're going to be working what we've called the angel special, where I have this wrapped around Preston's shoulder. He's going to be in a squatted position, and I want him to pop up like he's going to throw to second. He needs to contract his shoulder back in that cocking phase, and then he's going to make that throw forward to second. Again, we're trying to create an eccentric contraction by pulling the band, creating tension that he's going to have to control. Oh yeah, let's do one more. Squat down, pop up, pull back, and throw. Perfect. So for our functional movement, we're going to be working on having our patient be able to lift overhead. This is a very common one, for activities of daily living, whether you're at work or just putting something on the shelf in your home. Our first exercise is going to be shoulder shrugs. This would be done towards the later aspect of the inflammation phase, when they can start incorporating that shoulder movement. We would do this unweighted, and essentially what we're going to have them do is contract their traps and be able to bring their shoulders up towards their ears, just like that. Perfect. And as we progress them towards the proliferation phase, we can move towards eyes-wise tees. These can be done either unweighted, or we can have our patient hold weights in their hands. We want to keep those thumbs pointing up towards the sky, and we're going to do an eyes, which is full shoulder flexion, Y's coming up in that scaption position, and then T's coming up in the abduction. Eyes, Y's, T's. And we want this to be done as tolerated, so if our patient has difficulty going completely overhead, we would just have them go to about 90 degrees. Perfect. And then lastly, we would progress our patient to a full overhead press. In the maturation phase, we would like to for them to actually be working with heavier weights. So our patient's going to be pulling their hands in like a 90-90 position. And then we want them to be able to press straight up overhead, slowly coming back down. Perfect. They want to keep that core tight the entire time to create stability. And then as they progress through that maturation phase, we can increase the weight.